Commander Zhuangxtara had seen many species across the galaxy, but humans still puzzled her. The tall, pink-skinned creatures moved with an odd combination of grace and recklessness that made her forearms twitch with unease. She watched from the bridge of the Galactic Council warship Harmony's Edge as the human vessel approached their position near the Kepler Nebula. The humans had requested to join the battle against the Vorthak Empire, a decision that had caused heated debate in the council chambers for weeks. Most species viewed humans as newcomers to galactic civilization, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 300 years ago. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards. Their ships looked like flying metal boxes, and their weapons were based on simple kinetic energy rather than the sophisticated plasma arrays used by more advanced civilizations. Commander, her communications officer, a crystalline Xerian named Kliktar, chimed with worry. The human ship is broadcasting on all frequencies. Should I translate their message? Zhuangxtara's tail flicked with annoyance. Humans were notorious for their chattiness, filling communication channels with unnecessary banter when other species preferred efficient, silent coordination. Yes, put it through the universal translator. The bridge speakers crackled to life with a distinctly human voice, rough and filled with what sounded like amusement. This is Captain Sarah Chun of the US Defiant. We're here to help you folks kick some Vorthak tail. Hope you don't mind if we play our music a bit loud during the fight. It helps with morale. Before Zhuangxtara could respond, the human ship's external speakers began blasting what could only be described as organized noise. The pounding rhythms and aggressive melodies made her sensitive hearing organs ache, but she noticed something odd. The crew members of various species aboard her own ship had stopped their work to listen, and many seemed energized by the strange sounds. Fascinating, muttered Dr. Velnara, the ship's Altarian science officer. Human music appears to trigger adrenaline production in multiple species. I've never seen such a universal physiological response to auditory stimuli. The tactical display suddenly flashed red as enemy contacts appeared on the long-range sensors. 12 Vorthak dreadnoughts materialized from hyperspace, their black hulls bristling with weapons that could reduce planets to ash. Each ship was 3 times the size of the largest council vessel, and their shields were legendary for deflecting even the most powerful attacks. All ships, prepare for engagement, Zhuangxtara commanded, her voice steady despite the fear creeping through her system. The Vorthak Empire had been expanding aggressively for decades, conquering system after system with their superior technology and ruthless tactics. This battle would determine whether the Council could establish a foothold in this sector or be pushed back once again. The human ship, impossibly small compared to the Vorthak dreadnoughts, accelerated directly toward the enemy formation. Zhuangxtara's tactical officer, a 6-legged Thraxian named Gorthake, made a sound of disbelief. Commander, the humans are charging straight at the enemy line. That's suicide. Their ship has minimal shielding, and their weapons can't possibly penetrate Vorthak armor. Zhuangxtara was about to order the human ship to fall back when Captain Chin's voice crackled through the speakers again, this time with a tone that sent chills down her spine. Defiant to all council ships. You might want to take cover behind those asteroids over there. We're about to show you why humans don't stay conquered. The words were spoken with such casual confidence that Zhuangxtara found herself ordering the retreat without fully understanding why. Something in the human captain's voice suggested knowledge of terrible things, secrets that other species had never learned. As the council ships took defensive positions, the Vorthak fleet opened fire. Brilliant streams of plasma lanced through space toward the tiny human vessel, enough firepower to vaporize a small moon. But the Defiant didn't try to avoid the attack or raise shields. Instead, it did something that made Zhuangxtara's blood freeze in her veins. The human ship's hull began to split open like a flower, revealing internal structures that defied everything she knew about starship engineering. What she had thought was a simple transport vessel was actually something far more complex and terrifying. By the Ancient Ones, Dr. Velnara whispered, her scanner readings fluctuating wildly. Commander, that ship is not what it appears to be. The energy readings are off the scale. How is this possible? The plasma beams struck the Defiant and simply disappeared, absorbed into the ship's transformed structure without causing any apparent damage. The human vessel continued its approach, now moving with predatory grace that reminded ZYX of the apex predators on her home world. "This is impossible," Gorthake stammered, his multiple eyes fixed on the tactical display. "No known technology can absorb that much energy without destruction. The humans must be using some kind of unknown science." Captain Chin's laughter echoed through the communication channel, a sound that was both reassuring and terrifying. "Science? Oh, my friend, this isn't about science. This is about what happens when you take a species that evolved by hunting creatures 10 times their size and give them 300 years to figure out how to build starships." The truth began to dawn on ZYX as she watched the human vessel tear through the Vortex formation like a predator among prey. The other council species had developed their technologies through careful research and gradual advancement, building upon millions of years of peaceful evolution. But humans were different. They were hunters, warriors, survivors who had clawed their way to the top of their planet's food chain through violence and cunning. And now they had turned those same instincts toward the stars. The first Vortex dreadnought exploded in a brilliant flash as the Defiant somehow bypassed its shields and struck directly at its core. The other enemy ships tried to adjust their formation, but the human vessel was already moving to its next target with impossible speed and agility. "How are they doing this?" ZYX demanded, but Dr. Velnara could only shake her head in amazement. "I'm detecting massive gravitational distortions around their ship. They're somehow manipulating space-time itself, but the energy requirements should be impossible for a vessel that size. Unless..." The science officer's voice trailed off as understanding dawned in her large, compound eyes. "Unless what?" ZYX pressed. "Unless they've weaponized their own ship's destruction. Commander, I believe the humans are using their vessel as a controlled singularity generator. They're literally tearing holes in reality and using them as weapons." The implications were staggering. Most species develop technology to preserve life and promote peace. Only humans would think to turn their own ship into a weapon of mass destruction and then find a way to survive the process. As the second Vortex dreadnought fell to the human assault, ZYX realized that everything the Galactic Council thought they knew about warfare had just become obsolete. The humans hadn't just joined the battle. They had redefined what battle could be. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a terrifying thought began to take shape. If humans could do this to their enemies, what would stop them from doing it to anyone who opposed them? The galaxy had just welcomed a new member to the council, but perhaps they had actually invited a predator into their midst. The communication channel crackled again with Captain Chin's voice, now carrying an undertone of something that made ZYX's survival instincts scream in alarm. "Council ships, you might want to start taking notes. Class is now in session, and today's lesson is why humans don't lose wars." The third Vortex dreadnought tried to retreat, its massive engines glowing white-hot as it attempted to reach the minimum safe distance for a hyperspace jump. ZYX watched in fascination and horror as the human ship pursued it, moving in ways that violated every principle of physics she understood. "Commander," Kliktar's crystalline voice rang with panic. "The human vessel is exceeding the theoretical maximum velocity for objects of its mass. Our sensors are detecting temporal distortions around the ship." Dr. Velnara's scanners were working frantically, trying to process readings that made no sense according to established science. The humans appear to be operating outside normal causality. They're arriving at locations before they should be able to reach them. ZYX felt a chill run through her exoskeleton. Time manipulation was considered impossible by every major galactic civilization. The energy requirements alone would require harnessing the power output of entire stars, and the technological complexity was beyond anything in the Council's databases. The fleeing Vortex ship suddenly stopped, its engines flickering out as if cut by an invisible hand. The Defiant materialized beside it, having somehow traveled across several thousand kilometers in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "This is Captain Chun to the Vortex vessel." The human's voice carried across all frequencies, calm and conversational. "You have two options. Surrender now, or we demonstrate why your empire has been having nightmares about Earth for the past 50 years. Zoyexthara's head snapped toward her intelligence officer, a pale Andromedian named Sylvan. Nightmares? What does she mean by nightmares? Sylvan's normally composed features were twitching with nervous energy. Commander, I've been reviewing classified files since the battle began. There have been reports from the Outer Rim, Vorthack colonies going silent, entire fleets disappearing without trace. The Empire has been attributing these losses to unknown weapons or natural phenomena. And now we know the truth, Zoyexthara whispered. The Vorthack dreadnought's response was predictable. Every weapon on the ship opened fire simultaneously, filling space with enough destructive energy to crack a moon. The plasma beams, particle cannons, and gravity bombs all converged on the tiny human vessel. Captain Chin's laughter echoed through the communication channels. Wrong choice. What happened next would haunt Zoyexthara's dreams for decades to come. The human ship didn't dodge or deflect the incoming fire. Instead, it seemed to step sideways through dimensions, existing in multiple locations simultaneously. The Vorthack weapons struck empty space while the Defiant attacked from angles that shouldn't exist. Impossible, breathed Dr. Velnara. They're operating in folded space, creating pocket dimensions around their ship. But the computational power required to maintain spatial coherence across multiple dimensional layers would require an artificial intelligence more advanced than anything in our records. The Vorthack dreadnought began to break apart, but not from conventional weapons fire. Instead, sections of the ship simply ceased to exist, as if reality itself was being edited around it. Within moments, the massive vessel was reduced to scattered debris, its crew never even understanding how they had died. Attention all Vorthack ships. Captain Chin's voice had taken on a tone of friendly menace. This is your final warning. You can surrender now, or we can continue this demonstration. But I should mention that what you've seen so far is just our standard patrol ship. We have much more interesting toys back home. The remaining 9 Vorthack dreadnoughts suddenly changed course, forming a defensive sphere around their flagship. Zoyexthara could hear frantic communications between the enemy vessels, their commanders trying to understand what they were facing. Commander, Gorth AK reported, his multiple eyes wide with disbelief. The Vorthack ships are broadcasting surrender requests. They're offering complete withdrawal from this sector and reparations for previous attacks. Zoyexthara stared at the tactical display. The mighty Vorthack Empire, conquerors of 100 worlds, was surrendering to a single human ship. But Captain Chin's response sent ice through her veins. Oh, that's very generous of you. But here's the thing about humans that you probably don't understand. We don't just fight wars to win them. We fight wars to make sure they never happen again. The Defiant began to change again, its hull flowing like liquid metal as new structures emerged from its core. Zoyexthara's sensors detected energy buildups that registered as small stellar events. What is she doing? Zoyexthara demanded. Dr. Velnara's voice was barely a whisper. I believe she's preparing to demonstrate human doctrine regarding permanent solutions to aggressive neighbors. The lead Vorthack ship, a massive dreadnought that served as the fleet's command vessel, suddenly found itself surrounded by perfect copies of the human ship. But these weren't illusions or holograms. Each copy was generating its own energy signature, its own gravitational field. Temporal multiplication, DR. Velnara said faintly. They're pulling versions of their ship from parallel timelines. The energy cost should be impossible to sustain. Captain Chin's voice carried across the battlefield with terrible certainty. Every species in this galaxy needs to understand something about humans. We don't conquer for resources or territory. We don't enslave populations or destroy cultures. But when someone threatens our friends or our values, we become something that makes ancient nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. The multiple versions of the Defiant began to work in perfect coordination, each ship targeting a different Vorthack vessel. But instead of destroying them outright, they began to systematically disable every system on the enemy ships. Weapons, shields, engines, life support. Everything shut down in a carefully orchestrated sequence that left the Vorthack crews alive, but completely helpless. You see, Captain Chun continued, her tone now educational. Most species fight until their enemies are defeated. Humans fight until their enemies' great-great-grandchildren don't even remember why their ancestors thought conflict was a good idea. ZYX-Thara watched in amazement as the human ships began to interface directly with the Vorthack vessel's computer systems. Lines of energy connected the ships, and she realized that the humans were downloading everything: fleet positions, military codes, technological specifications, even personal files on every officer in the Vorthack command structure. "They're taking everything," Sylvan reported in a stunned voice. "Every piece of intelligence the Vorthack Empire possesses is being copied to human databases. Their entire military infrastructure is being mapped in real time." But the humans weren't finished. As ZYX-Thara watched, new information began flowing in the other direction. The Vorthack ship's computers started displaying data that made their crews recoil in terror. "What are they showing them?" ZYX-Thara asked. Dr. Velnara's scanner readings provided the answer. Historical records from Earth. Images of human conflicts, technological development, population growth rates, industrial capacity. They're showing the Vorthack exactly what humanity is capable of when properly motivated. The lead Vorthack commander's voice crackled across the communication channel, filled with a fear that ZYX-Thara had never heard from their species before. "Please, humans. We understand. We will withdraw. We will never return to this sector. Just, please don't show us anymore." Captain Chin's response was gentle, almost maternal. "Oh, we're not trying to frighten you. We're trying to educate you. You see, what you're looking at is what humans accomplished when we were limited to a single planet and didn't know there was anyone else in the universe. Would you like to see what we've been working on now that we know about galactic civilization?" The silence that followed was profound. Even ZYX-Thara's own crew had stopped working. Every being on the bridge focused on the human captain's words. "No," the Vorthack commander whispered. "Please, no. We understand. We submit. We will never threaten Council space again." "Excellent," Captain Chun replied cheerfully. "Then, our work here is done. Council ships, you might want to send some salvage crews to collect those Vorthack wrecks. They contain some interesting technology that could be useful for peaceful purposes." As the remaining Vorthack ships limped away into hyperspace, ZYX-Thara realized that the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted permanently. The humans hadn't just won a battle. They had redefined what victory meant. And they had done it all with a single ship and a crew that seemed to find the entire experience amusing rather than challenging. After the Vorthack retreat, an eerie calm settled over the battlefield. The human ship Defiant floated among the wreckage like a predator surveying its hunting grounds, its hull slowly returning to its original configuration. ZYX-Thara found herself staring at the vessel, trying to understand how something that looked so ordinary could possess such devastating capabilities. "Commander," Clicktar chimed nervously. "Captain Chun is requesting permission to come aboard. She says she wants to discuss future cooperation between humans and the Council." ZYX-Thara's forearms trembled slightly. The idea of having a human on her ship both terrified and fascinated her. "Grant permission. Have security teams standing by, but tell them to remain hidden. I don't want to appear hostile." "Is that wise, Commander?" Gorthay K asked, his tactical display still showing the impossible energy readings from the human vessel. "We don't know what other capabilities they might possess." Dr. Velnara looked up from her scanners, her compound eyes reflecting confusion. "I'm detecting a single life form preparing to transfer from the human ship. But the energy signature is unlike anything in our biological databases. It's as if Captain Chun exists partially outside normal dimensional space." 20 minutes later, ZYX-Thara stood in the main docking bay, watching as a small human shuttle approached. The craft was even more modest than their main ship, looking like something a civilian might use for short-range transport. But after what she had witnessed, ZYX-Thara knew better than to judge human technology by its appearance. The shuttle's airlock cycled open, and Captain Sarah Chun stepped onto her ship. ZYX-Thara was surprised by how normal the human looked. She was of average height for her species, with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes that spoke of good humor rather than the cold calculation ZYX-Thara had expected from such a formidable warrior. "Commander ZYX-Thara," Chin said with a warm smile, extending her right hand in the human gesture of greeting. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person. I've read about your campaigns against the hegemony pirates. Impressive work. Zyxthara cautiously extended one of her arms to clasp the human's hand, noting that Chin's grip was firm but not aggressive. Captain Chun, I must admit, after what we witnessed today, I'm not sure how to address you. Are you a military officer, a scientist, or something else entirely? Chun laughed, a genuinely pleasant sound that somehow made Zyxthara's tension ease slightly. All three, actually. But mostly I'm just a human who's very good at her job. Would you mind if we talk somewhere private? There are things about my species that the Council needs to understand. They made their way to Zyxthara's ready room, a comfortable space designed for interspecies meetings. Chun accepted the offer of synthetic coffee, a beverage that humans had introduced to galactic civilization and which had become surprisingly popular among many species. Your ship, Zyxthara began without preamble. The technologies you demonstrated today, they're beyond anything in our databases. How is this possible? Chun settled into her chair, her expression becoming more serious. That's the question every species asks when they first encounter human military doctrine in action. The answer is complicated, but it starts with understanding what humans are. She paused to sip her coffee, then continued. Most species in the galaxy evolved as prey animals or peaceful omnivores. Their civilizations developed through cooperation, shared resources, and gradual technological advancement. But humans are different. We're persistence hunters who climb to the top of our planet's food chain by being more stubborn, more adaptable, and more viciously creative than anything else on Earth. Zyxthara leaned forward, fascinated despite her apprehension. But that doesn't explain your technology. The energy manipulations, the dimensional folding, the temporal multiplication, these abilities require scientific understanding that should take millions of years to develop. You're thinking about it wrong, Chun replied. You're assuming we developed these technologies through normal research and development. But humans don't approach problems the way other species do. When we encounter something that should be impossible, we don't accept that limitation. We find ways around it. Chun stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the debris field that had once been 3 Vorthack dreadnoughts. For example, everyone told us that faster-than-light travel was impossible without using established hyperspace lanes. So we found a way to fold space around our ships instead of moving through it. When they said energy shields were limited by power generation, we learned to borrow energy from parallel dimensions. Parallel dimensions? Zyxthara's voice cracked with disbelief. You're saying humans have access to other realities? Not access exactly, Chun said thoughtfully. More like we've learned to knock very politely on the doors between worlds and ask if we can borrow a few laws of physics. The key is understanding that reality is much more flexible than most species assume. She turned back to face Zyxthara, and, for a moment, the commander saw something in the human's eyes that made her understand why even the mighty Vorthack had fled in terror. It wasn't cruelty or malice, but rather an absolute confidence that no obstacle was truly insurmountable. The real secret, Chun continued, is that humans never accepted the idea that some problems don't have solutions. When our planet became overpopulated, we went to the stars. When the stars seemed too far away, we learned to bend space. When other species told us that certain technologies were impossible, we made them possible anyway. But the computational power required. Dr. Velnara's voice came through the communication system as she joined the conversation remotely. The artificial intelligences needed to manage such complex operations would have to be more advanced than anything we've ever encountered. Chen's smile became slightly sad. That's another thing about humans that makes other species uncomfortable. We don't use artificial intelligences for our most advanced technologies. We use something much more powerful and much more dangerous. What could be more powerful than advanced AI? Zyxthara asked. Human consciousness itself, Chin replied quietly. You see, when humans are properly trained and motivated, our brains can process information and manipulate reality in ways that no computer can match. We call it intuitive physics, the ability to understand and alter fundamental forces through direct mental interface. The implications were staggering. Zyxthara realized that humans weren't just using advanced technology, they were the technology. Their own minds had become weapons capable of rewriting the laws of nature. How many humans possess these abilities? She asked. More than you'd think, fewer than we need, Chen answered. It takes years of training and a particular mindset that not everyone can develop. But we're working on it. Human children now learn basic reality manipulation alongside mathematics and literature. Chen sat back down, her expression becoming businesslike. Which brings me to why I wanted to speak with you privately. The Galactic Council is about to face a choice that will determine the future of civilization in this galaxy. The Vorthak Empire was just the beginning. There are older, more powerful threats out there. Species that make the Vorthak look like children playing with toys. What kind of threats? Ziwaxthara asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. The Devourers are coming, Chen said simply. Ancient beings that consume entire realities, leaving nothing but empty space behind. They've already destroyed 3 neighboring galaxies, and our long-range sensors indicate they'll reach the edge of this galaxy within 50 years. Ziwaxthara felt her blood turn to ice. The Devourers were legends, mythical creatures that existed in the oldest stories of every galactic civilization. The idea that they were real and approaching was almost too terrible to contemplate. The Council has 2 options, Chen continued. You can try to fight them using conventional methods, in which case this galaxy will be consumed just like all the others. Or you can accept human assistance, and let us teach your species what we've learned about pushing the boundaries of what's possible. What would that entail? Ziwaxthara asked. Chen's smile returned, but now it carried an edge of predatory anticipation. We're going to teach the galaxy how to fight like humans. And when the Devourers arrive, they're going to discover that this galaxy bites back. Outside the viewport, the human ship Defiant pulsed with energies that bent light around its hull, a promise of the impossible made manifest in metal and human determination. 6 months after the encounter with the Vorthak fleet, Ziwaxthara found herself standing in what humans called a training facility on a remote moon in the Sol system. The structure defied every architectural principle she knew, with rooms that were larger inside than outside, and corridors that somehow connected to locations light years away. Welcome to the Institute, Captain Chen said, gesturing toward the impossible building. This is where we teach other species how to think like humans. Around them, beings from dozens of galactic civilizations moved through exercises that challenged everything Ziwaxthara thought she knew about physics. A group of crystalline Zirions were learning to phase through solid matter by convincing reality that they were actually energy beings. A squad of insectoid Thraxians practiced manipulating gravity by believing so strongly in their ability to fly that the universe eventually agreed with them. This is madness, Dr. Velnara whispered, her scanners working frantically to process readings that made no sense. How can belief alter physical laws? Because physical laws aren't as absolute as most species assume, replied Dr. Marcus Webb, a human physicist who served as one of the Institute's instructors. He was a thin man with prematurely gray hair and eyes that seemed to see through multiple dimensions simultaneously. Reality is actually quite collaborative. It responds to consciousness, especially consciousness that refuses to accept limitations. Ziwaxthara watched as a young Altarian successfully walked through a steel wall by maintaining absolute faith that the wall was merely a suggestion rather than a barrier. But this contradicts everything we know about quantum mechanics and relativistic physics. No, Dr. Webb said patiently, it expands on them. Your species learned about the universe by observing it from the outside. Humans learned by participating in it directly. We discovered that consciousness isn't just an observer of reality. It's a participant in creating it. They moved deeper into the facility, passing training rooms where species learned to bend space, manipulate time, and access what humans called the underlying code of existence. In one chamber, a Vorthak defector was practicing the technique that had destroyed his former comrades' ships, learning to edit reality by accessing its fundamental programming. The Vorthak volunteer is particularly gifted, Chen noted as they watched the alien slowly make a metal cube cease to exist. It seems that former enemies often make the best students. They're highly motivated to understand what defeated them. How long does this training take? Ziwaxthara asked. Depends on the species, Dr. Webb answered. Humans typically require about 15 years to achieve basic reality manipulation, but we start training in childhood. Most alien species need 20 to 30 years, partly because they have to unlearn their assumptions about what's possible. They entered a vast amphitheater where hundreds of beings from across the galaxy sat in meditation-like poses, their minds focused on exercises that ZYX couldn't begin to comprehend. At the center of the space stood an elderly human woman whose presence seemed to fill the entire chamber despite her small stature. That's Professor Elizabeth Santos, Chen said with obvious respect. She's our most advanced practitioner. She can manipulate matter at the quantum level just by thinking about it. As they watched, Professor Santos gestured casually toward a chunk of asteroid material floating in the center of the amphitheater. The rock began to transform, its atomic structure rearranging itself until it became a perfect crystal sculpture of a tree. Then, with another thought, she turned it into a miniature star that provided warm light to the entire chamber. Impressive, ZYX admitted. But how does this help us against the Devourers? From the ancient texts, they exist outside normal space and time. Professor Santos must have heard her question, because the elderly woman turned and smiled. Our new council observer. You're asking the right questions. Please, come closer. They approached the central platform where the professor waited, her eyes holding the same depth ZYX had seen in Captain Chen's gaze. The Devourers are indeed formidable, Santos said. They exist in a state that most beings would consider impossible. They are simultaneously matter, energy, consciousness, and void. They consume realities by convincing those realities that they never existed in the first place. Then, how can they be fought? ZYX asked. Santos smiled, and suddenly, the entire amphitheater began to change. The walls became transparent, revealing the vast cosmos beyond, but not as it normally appeared. Instead, ZYX could see the underlying structure of existence. Threads of possibility weaving together to create what most beings perceived as solid reality. By becoming more real than they are, Santos said simply, the Devourers can only consume realities that doubt their own existence. But consciousness that absolutely believes in itself, that insists on its right to exist, becomes effectively indestructible. She gestured toward the assembled students. Every being here is learning to anchor themselves so firmly in existence that no external force can edit them out of reality. They're becoming permanent fixtures in the cosmic code. ZYX felt a chill of understanding. You're turning every species in the galaxy into weapons. No, Santos corrected gently. We're teaching them to become something the Devourers have never encountered before, a reality that fights back. A universe that refuses to be consumed. Dr. Webb activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Thousands of training facilities like this one had been established across council space, each one teaching local species how to expand their consciousness beyond normal limitations. The progress has been remarkable, Webb reported. Altarian navigators can now pilot ships through folded space using intuition rather than computers. Thraxian engineers are building structures that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Even the notoriously conservative Andromedians are experimenting with temporal mechanics. But will it be enough? ZYX asked. Captain Chen placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Let me show you something that might answer that question. They left the main facility and traveled to a smaller building that hummed with barely contained energy. Inside, ZYX found herself looking at what could only be described as a window into another reality. This is our early warning system, Chen explained. We've learned to monitor the space between galaxies, watching for signs of devourer activity. What you're seeing is the Andromeda Galaxy, approximately 6 months ago. The image showed a beautiful spiral of stars, planets, and nebulae. Then, as ZYX watched, something began to change. The stars started winking out, not exploding or collapsing, but simply ceasing to exist. Entire sectors of space became empty voids where matter and energy had once danced in cosmic harmony. The Devourers, Professor Santos said quietly. They've finished with Andromeda and are moving toward our galaxy. We estimate they'll reach the outer rim in approximately 18 months. 18 months, Zhuangthara repeated, her voice barely a whisper. Can we prepare an entire galaxy in 18 months? We're going to find out, Chun said with grim determination. But there's something else you need to see. The image changed, showing a different view of the cosmic void where Andromeda had once existed. But as Zhuangthara looked closer, she saw something impossible. In the absolute emptiness left by the Devourers, tiny points of light were beginning to appear. What is that? She asked. Santos smiled. And for the first time since meeting the humans, Zhuangthara saw something that looked like hope rather than determination. That, my dear commander, is consciousness refusing to accept non-existence. Some of the beings we trained in Andromeda survived the devouring by anchoring themselves so firmly in reality that even the Devourers couldn't erase them. They're fighting back, Dr. Webb added, rebuilding reality from scratch using nothing but the force of their will and their absolute refusal to be defeated. Zhuangthara stared at the image, watching as the tiny lights slowly began to spread, rekindling stars and planets through sheer stubbornness. You're teaching us to be like them. We're teaching you to be better than them, Chin corrected. Because when the Devourers reach this galaxy, they're not going to find scattered individuals making a desperate last stand. They're going to find an entire civilization that has learned to treat impossible as merely a starting point for negotiation. Outside the facility, the human sun continued to shine with the steady confidence that had inspired an entire species to reach for the stars. And, across the galaxy, millions of beings were learning that the most powerful force in existence wasn't energy or matter or even time itself. It was the simple, stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The day the Devourers arrived, Zhuangthara stood on the bridge of a ship that existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously. Around her, a crew composed of every major galactic species worked in perfect harmony, their consciousness linked through techniques that humans had taught them over the past year and a half. Contact on the long-range sensors, reported Clicktar, whose crystalline structure now resonated with frequencies that existed outside normal space. Devourer signature confirmed. Distance, 1 light-year, and closing. Zhuangthara felt the familiar chill of fear, but it was tempered by something she had never experienced before, absolute certainty in her right to exist. The training had changed her, changed all of them. They were no longer just individual beings hoping to survive. They had become integral parts of reality itself, woven so deeply into the fabric of existence that removing them would require unraveling the universe. All ships report ready status, announced Gorthay K, his multiple eyes now capable of seeing through temporal layers. The Thraxian tactical officer had learned to perceive attacks before they were launched, making him invaluable in battles against enemies who existed outside normal causality. Through the viewports, Zhuangthara could see the gathered fleet. Ships from every council species hung in space alongside human vessels. But these weren't the primitive craft she had first encountered. Each ship was a marriage of advanced technology and expanded consciousness, crewed by beings who had learned to think like humans while retaining their own unique perspectives. Dr. Velnara, report on the reality anchors, Zhuangthara ordered. All dimensional locks are holding steady. The Altarian science officer responded, her compound eyes now capable of seeing the underlying code of existence. Every ship in the fleet is anchored across multiple probability streams. Even if the Devourers manage to erase us from one reality, we'll continue to exist in others. The communication system crackled with Captain Chin's familiar voice, now transmitted from the flagship Eternal Defiance, a vessel that had been built using principles that most species still considered theoretical. All stations, this is Admiral Chun, she said, having been promoted to overall fleet commander as humanity's military doctrine spread throughout the galaxy. Remember, we're not just fighting for our own survival. We're fighting for the right of consciousness itself to exist in this universe. Through their enhanced senses, the crew could perceive the approaching Devourers as they truly were, vast entities of anti-existence that moved through space like holes in reality. They didn't travel in the conventional sense. Instead, they simply convinced the universe that they had always been wherever they chose to appear. My gods, whispered Dr. Velnara, her voice filled with awe and terror. "They're enormous. Each one is the size of a solar system, and they're made of nothing. Organized, malevolent nothing. Then, we'll show them something they've never encountered before." Admiral Chen's voice carried across the fleet with absolute confidence. Organized, malevolent something. The first devourer reached the edge of the galaxy and immediately began its work. Stars started disappearing, not destroyed, but simply edited out of existence as if they had never been born. Planets, moons, entire stellar nurseries vanished into absolute void. Fleet Formation Omega, Admiral Chun commanded. "All ships, begin reality assertion protocols." Ziyxtara felt the change as every consciousness in the fleet focused their will on a single purpose. They weren't just maintaining their own existence anymore. They were actively creating new reality to replace what the Devourers consumed. As fast as the ancient entities erased matter and energy, the combined fleet generated new stars and planets through pure determination. "It's working," Dr. Velnara reported with excitement. "We're actually negating their effect. The galaxy is maintaining its total mass despite their presence." But the Devourers adapted quickly. The lead entity turned its attention toward the fleet itself. Its alien consciousness focused on convincing the universe that these troublesome new beings had never existed. The attack hit them like a wave of absolute negation. Ziyxtara felt her own existence questioned, challenged, as reality itself began to doubt whether she belonged in this universe. But her training held. The months of learning to anchor herself in existence proved stronger than any external attempt to erase her. Around her, the crew weathered the assault with varying degrees of success. Some flickered briefly, becoming translucent as their hold on reality wavered. But none disappeared completely. They had been too thoroughly integrated into the cosmic code for even the Devourers to edit them out entirely. "All ships, begin the human protocol," Admiral Chun ordered. "Time to show them what happens when you pick a fight with species that refuse to lose." Ziyxtara watched in amazement as the entire fleet began to implement tactics that would have been considered insane by any previous military doctrine. Instead of trying to destroy the Devourers, they began to convince reality that the ancient entities didn't belong in this universe. "You see," came Professor Santos's voice from the research vessel paradigm shift. "The Devourers have always succeeded because they were the only ones playing the game of reality manipulation. But now they face an entire galaxy that has learned to rewrite existence according to their own rules." Ship after ship began broadcasting a coordinated message directly into the fundamental structure of spacetime itself. They weren't using weapons in any conventional sense. Instead, they were filing a complaint with the universe about the presence of these unwelcome entities. "This reality is occupied," the message read, transmitted through quantum fields and probability waves. "The entities known as Devourers are in violation of local existential law and must vacate the premises immediately." The effect was immediate and profound. The lead Devourer suddenly found itself facing resistance it had never encountered. Reality began to question its right to exist, just as it had questioned the right of countless galaxies before. "Impossible," Dr. Velnara breathed, watching her instruments. "The Devourer is actually retreating. It's being pushed out of normal space by the universe itself." But the ancient entity wasn't finished. Drawing on eons of experience, it began to access older, deeper levels of reality, fundamental forces that existed before consciousness itself had evolved in the universe. "It's going primal," Admiral Chen warned. "All ships, prepare for temporal displacement. They're going to try to erase us from history itself." The Devourer's attack came as a wave of temporal negation, an attempt to convince the universe that none of the gathered species had ever evolved consciousness. It was their ultimate weapon, one that had destroyed entire galactic civilizations by preventing them from ever achieving sentience. But humans had prepared for this possibility. Across the fleet, specially trained individuals began implementing what they called the paradox protocol, a defensive technique that was typically considered suicide by any rational standard. "All temporal anchors, prepare for consciousness scattering," Admiral Chen commanded. "Remember, you can't erase someone from history if they insist on existing in all possible timelines simultaneously." ZYXTHRA felt her awareness suddenly expand across multiple realities. She existed as herself aboard the ship, but also as every possible version of herself that could have ever existed. Past, present, and future became meaningless concepts as her consciousness scattered across the infinite probability matrix. The Devourer's temporal attack struck empty space. There was no single timeline to erase, no single reality to edit. Every being in the fleet had become a quantum paradox, simultaneously existing and not existing, present in all realities and none. Now, Admiral Chen's voice echoed across dimensions. Let's show them what humans call a permanent solution. The scattered consciousness of the entire fleet began to converge on a single purpose. Not to destroy the Devourers, but to do something far more ambitious. Using techniques that pushed the boundaries of what even humans considered possible, they began to rewrite the fundamental laws that allowed the Devourers to exist. We're editing the cosmic code itself, Dr. Velnara reported, her voice filled with wonder. We're removing the mathematical possibility for entities like the Devourers to exist in any reality. The ancient entity fought back desperately, accessing powers that had destroyed entire universes. But for every law of physics it invoked, the combined consciousness of the galaxy simply rewrote those laws to exclude beings of anti-existence. The battle raged across multiple dimensions, through past and future simultaneously, as consciousness fought against the void for the right to define what reality could contain. In the end, it wasn't superior firepower that won the day, but something far more fundamental. Pure, stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The Devourer began to fade, not destroyed, but simply edited out of the universe's operating system. One by one, its abilities failed as reality itself was rewritten to exclude the possibility of entities that consumed existence. It's over, Admiral Chen announced as the last Devourer vanished into a void that no longer connected to any reality. The universe is now officially closed to customers of their particular variety. As the fleet began to reassemble in normal space, ZYXTHRA looked around at her crew with new understanding. They were no longer just members of various species trying to survive in a hostile galaxy. They had become something new. Consciousness itself made manifest, reality's way of ensuring its own continuity. Commander, Kliktar chimed with what sounded like amusement. I'm detecting a message from the Vorthak Empire. They're requesting permission to enroll in the human training programs. ZYXTHRA laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed across the ship's communication system. Grant the request. After all, there's always room for more stubborn consciousness in this universe. Outside the viewports, the galaxy sparkled with renewed stars, each one a testament to the power of beings who had learned the most important lesson humans could teach, that impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been achieved yet. And, in the distance, barely visible to their enhanced senses, new galaxies were beginning to form in the void where the Devourers had once consumed everything. Consciousness was spreading, reality was expanding, and the universe was learning to defend itself. The day they had joined humans in battle had become the day the galaxy learned to think like humans. And that, ZYXTHRA realized, made all the difference in the universe.